The last video was an introduction toward cover. This is a continuation of that conversation. We defined it as protecting you from direct damage and hiding info from the enemy. Most objects and cover in the game will do both, but what about scenarios where you can do one or the other? You can hide your information, but can't block damage. Or what if you can prevent damage, but not hide information? So hiding information being your position, your movement, you paint the map, you hide in that ink, and that is sharking. The reason why sharking is so scary is because traditional cover is static. When people are looking to push on the map, there are static objects that they are painting over, or they're checking behind, and making sure that the enemy isn't there. But when you're sharking, you could literally be anywhere, or at least anywhere that you've painted. So sharking is a bit of risk taking and also cashing in on the paint that you put on the map. When trying to set up a successful shark, I like to think about 3 categories to better increase the odds of being successful. The first one is the total paint on the map. So the more coverage that you have on the map, the more places that you're able to hide, and the more places that the enemy team has to check in order to successfully move forward. The second criteria is choosing what I consider a random spot. Usually you'll want it to be a wider spot on the map, because the enemy team often doesn't want to focus painting the sides of the map. Usually the most important paint to get on the map is central, so they want to prioritize getting that central paint, and a lot of times they'll neglect the outer parts of the map. Usually you want to be farther away from traditional cover. When people sweep the map and try to find the enemy, they are going to look behind the traditional cover first. So the farther you are from that traditional cover, if you're exposed, you're gonna be out in the open, which is a little bit risky, but there's less of a chance of someone actually finding you because people are gonna prioritize checking over a wall, checking under a ledge. The random spot also needs to be unpredictable. So when you're looking to shark throughout the course of a match, throughout the course of a set, you wanna mix up where it is that you're sharking. And the final way to increase your chances of a successful shark is catching the enemy team off guard. So a lot of times the most successful sharks will be the ones where the enemy team is already focused on something else. A lot of times teams will tunnel vision during specific moments when it comes to the objective. So if it's at the very end of the game and they need to capture the zone, or they need to take the tower, people are going to be hyper focused on doing that. Sometimes you can catch the enemy team focusing on getting to specific positions. What is that next cover, or what is that next spot on the map that person wants to get to? Every weapon has its comfort zone and has this powerful position that they really want to leverage. If you're able to read the enemy and you know what weapon and where they want to be for that next fight, you can get there before them, shark the area, and surprise them before they're able to actually set up. And there's some different types. The hit and run that throughout the course of the match, maybe the enemy team's focused on a fight, maybe they're focused on the objective, and you are not overcommitting into areas, but play on the sides. If they are trying to sweep the map, sweep the paint, and find you, you can back up relatively safely. If they don't, then there's an opportunity for a pick. So very low committal. Sometimes you'll find the pick, but if you don't, it's not really a big deal. In terms of medium commitment, there is the opportunist, where you sit in those high impact areas. Maybe you're sitting underneath a ledge. If you get caught, you might not have a lot of good places to run. You know that there's going to be a fight there. You know the enemy team wants to do something in that area, so you're kind of forcing a play. The highest level of commitment is what I like to consider the mastermind. Those sharks where you're playing super patient and you have a very specific play in mind. Usually you're going to be routing behind the enemy team, and you're probably going to even let them start pushing past you. I'm thinking about opportunities where the enemy team has to move the Rainmaker, has to move the tower. You're looking for a key target, whether that be the objective, or you're looking for the opportunity to quickly splat 2, 3, maybe even the entire enemy team. You are probably going to be off the map for a considerable amount of time, so you have to be very calculated about when to go for these plays. What about that other type of cover where you're able to prevent damage but not hide your position? That I don't think has a specific name, but I'm just going to consider it outranging. So this is when you're able to be out in the open. You're not necessarily having to play behind cover. You're playing outside of the enemy team's range. So when would you use this? The most obvious one is when you have a range advantage, especially during this meta. Those mid-range weapons, Stampers, Nautilus, Blasters, they will have moments in the match where they drastically outrange the rest of the enemy team. Another common use case is when you are pretty comfortable with the current game state. A lot of times this is when you have a relatively strong lead in a match, and when the enemy team has to push into you. When you have control of the objective, when you have sufficient control of the map, comfortably stalling out time, and you're just trying to waste the clock. Sometimes playing farther back simplifies a lot of scenarios. Anytime that you've had to play against a team with a really good E leader, sometimes just moving around the map can really be a pain. So if you have a very comfortable lead, sometimes you can play outside of the leader range or outside of the enemy team's Zuka range. Even as a weapon that doesn't really have a lot of range, so your shorter range shooters, they may also want to play a little bit farther back. The biggest thing is that it allows you to freely paint, and with those safer rotations, you can get a lot of paint down from farther back, and you don't have to worry about threats from the enemy team. It also allows you an opportunity to safely set up to use your specials. So something like V-Shot, very prevalent in the meta. Their normal weapon doesn't have a lot of range, but if they use their Zuka, their range is significantly bigger and gives them significantly more options. Or if you're using something like Tri-Strikes, where you're not very mobile and you're very prone to getting counterattacked, but if you're a little bit farther back, you have more time to react to them and can probably get off your Tri-Strikes before the enemy team can get in range to find a punish. While all this sounds nice, there are some issues with playing that farther back range. If you play too far back from the enemy team, you might be too far back to be able to take proactive actions in the match. You might miss out on ledge camps or shark opportunity. So you make things a little bit safer, but you're also giving the enemy team a lot more room to be able to maneuver and do things on the map. Another situation where it would be advantageous to play a little bit slower and potentially give up more space is when you are really far behind in the match. We talked about sharking before, where you're using your paint advantage to catch the enemy team off guard. If you're the team that is struggling and is falling behind in the match, you may need to play outside of the range of the enemy team's paint. This will allow you to be safe while you're setting up for a push if the enemy team is going for sharks of their own. Sometimes it might take 30 seconds, a minute and a half to build the resources that are required to win a team fight. One of the biggest mistakes that I think a lot of newer teams make are constantly taking a fight. They're not setting up, they're not building this paint, they're not playing safe while the enemy team has a significant part of the map controlled. And that opens them up to getting sharked, that opens them up to flanks, that opens them up to staying in this stagger loop where maybe you get a trade, but you trade back with the enemy, and there's just a lot of back and forth that ultimately will waste more time, and that'll lead to you being stuck in your base for a minute, 2 minutes, the entire match. Some common plays that take advantage of outranging the opponent, there is the farmer. A lot of times those are your shorter range weapons that are very paint focused, and they're able to farm their special by safely being able to paint the map, rotate to another part of the map, paint that part of the map, and very quickly move around, get the paint they need in order to get their specials. You might be able to lightly contest space with the enemy, but if they pressure you and they try to call your bluff, ultimately you're probably gonna have to give up that space. So this is a low commitment type of play with range, but it's very common for especially a lot of support type weapons. You think about V-Shot, you think about Splash, you think about Zap in the current meta. Give up that space, but you're able to very, very quickly get your special. So the next type of play is the Challenger, and those are weapons that love instigating a fight against anyone and everyone. Again, those mid-range weapons in this meta. I would say this is medium level commitment, because if you're able to really exploit some advantage with your weapon or your comp, it can be very low commitment but very high impact. But a lot of times, most balanced comps, there's a little bit of give and take where a lot of those fights are gonna kind of be 50-50, and it's just a matter of who's able to play it a little bit better, or who's able to find a small advantage to be able to find that initial pick. The Challenger loves to play underneath ledges or play where the enemy team's trying to set up and constantly poke at them, constantly be this nuisance that doesn't allow the enemy team that breathing room to be able to set up comfortably for their push. And the last type is what I consider the baiter, and this is a very high commitment play. You specifically put yourself into a position that seems bad from the enemy team's perspective and they're looking to capitalize on you, maybe being out in the open and potentially able to get punished, but you're using that information against them, are they going to drop off that ledge and commit to that fight that does look very good for them on the surface? But if you're able to anticipate the enemy team looking for that play, you can pull the carpet under their feet and move back as they're jumping off the ledge. So you're still staying outside of their range, but now they've dropped off the ledge. Now they've committed to that play and you might be able to punish them. Your teammates might be able to punish them. It can be a little bit scary because if you're not paying attention, you are going to get punished and it can be very bad. So again, don't just be out in the open and hoping that, oh, I'm going to bait the enemy team by just playing out in the open. You want to have a very specific play in mind with a very specific weapon on a very specific part of the map. You probably won't get these kinds of bait opportunities all that much, but when they happen, they feel really, really good. Sometimes you'll also have a combination of sharking and outranging the enemy. Some examples of that are sharking if you're able to get to a part of the map before the enemy team. So if your team wipes them out, the enemy team is getting back into the map and looking to set up for a retake. You're already set up, you're already sharking underneath their ledges, and maybe you're poking over that ledge with a slosher, with bombs. So you shark first, you poke at them, you look for that good opportunity to find a pick. If you get it, great, you keep the pressure. If you don't, you back up, give up that space because maybe it's not safe for you to be under that ledge anymore. A common example of this is Custom Blaster using their range to poke at the top left of Manta zones when the enemy team's trying to retake. So many times the enemy team will just use the rail or they'll just immediately go toward the top left high ground. That's a common retake spot. As something like Custom Range Blaster, you can get an angle to very consistently two-shot people from under that ledge. If you're able to time when the enemy team is actually climbing up that ledge or jumping off that rail or getting to that top left ramp and that high ground, you can shoot at them as they're getting into that position and find free picks. If you're playing underneath a ledge, the scenario is way different if the enemy team's already set up versus they're trying to get into that position. If they're trying to get into that position, you might be at the advantage when you're under the ledge. But once they're already set up in those positions, being under that ledge is now very, very dangerous. In conclusion, these are definitely not the only ways to play the game and the only ways to work around cover, but my goal with these videos are to provide you structure, to provide you examples, to feel comfortable with exploring these ideas. Once you get comfortable in these scenarios and you have some tools in your tool belt, at that point, it's really important for you to explore, to experiment, to really try out things for your specific weapon, for your specific kit on specific maps, specific parts of the map. There are so many little advantages that you can get that aren't able to be covered in a video like this that's a little bit more general, a little bit more kind of defining these different scenarios that you'll find yourself in. Really get creative, make it your own. I'm sure there's so many other sharking opportunities and opportunities to play outside of range that I did not cover here that are super, super useful. So again, this is going to be a little bit of a longer series on cover, and we've kind of gotten through the definition side of it with these first two videos. Now we're going to start getting into more practical usage of playing around cover, navigating around cover, and a lot of specifics when you're actually in those scenarios. Like, subscribe, do all of that fun YouTube engagement stuff, comments, all that fun stuff. And yeah, until next time.